session now. My name's Jonathan Neal. I'm from the Campaign Against Climate Change. This is the session on fighting climate change and for climate jobs internationally and locally. We've got 5 speakers, one of them on Skype from the United States, so I'm going to be fierce about the timing. I won't introduce everybody now. I'll introduce them as they each get up to speak. There will be time for questions from the floor after we've done this. I want to start with Manuel Cortes, who is the General Secretary of the Transport and Salaried Staffs Association and a stalwart of the climate change movement and the climate jobs movement for many years. Manuel?
Thank you, Jonathan. Can I first of all thank the organisers of this conference for inviting me to speak. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. But I also want to thank all of you as well for having come along to this event. Because you know, you can have the best ideas in the world, you can have the best plan in the world, but it would not see the light of day without people like yourselves going in day out, selling what we're trying to do. And it's about winning a consensus for climate jobs and for stopping any further damage to our planet. You know, and I'm sure you don't need reminding of this, but I think we've wasted a huge opportunity to do things differently. In 2008, when the economic crisis struck, you would have thought that we would have had strong enough politicians to consign the neoliberal economic model to where it belonged, the dustbin of history. Instead of that, what did they do? They used our money, and loads of our money, to give it a shot in the arm rather than a decent burial. And of course, what have we got now? We've got 2 crises. We've got an economic crisis that shows no signs whatsoever of abating, and a climate crisis where on a daily basis, because we're not doing anywhere near enough to reduce emissions, we are getting closer and closer to that, hopefully, day that we will never reach of runaway climate change. You know, there's a big debate on when we will cross that Rubicon. But what I am definitely sure, I'm not a scientist, I couldn't tell you when the day will be. But the one thing I'm absolutely convinced is that if we continue to do nothing or very little, as we appear to be doing, we are taking a huge chance, and that day becomes closer and closer. Why do we, as a trade union, support climate jobs? We support it for a number of reasons. The first one is that we do not own this planet. It is our duty to pass it to the next generation in as good a shape, or hopefully a better shape, than the one we found it. The second is that if we haven't got climate jobs, what other kind of jobs have we got? Unemployment continue to spiral out of control. And even when we were told that we had a good economic climate, for want of another word, there were still millions of people across the industrialized world, never mind anywhere else, who had no access to work and who were desperate to get a job. So changing the economic model that we've got to one that is sustainable, but one that generates jobs, is something that is crying out to be done here and now. And the reality is that we cannot leave it any further. You know, I think there's an estimate, there's 300,000 building workers out of a job. There's lots of people with no homes. We've got lots of homes that need to be retrofitted to make sure that we reduce our emissions. You know, this is the economics of the madhouse. People wanting to do jobs that need to be done, and yet nobody with the political will to get those jobs done. And you know, they'll tell us it's going to cost money. Well, I tell you, it ain't going to cost a fraction of what it costs to save the banks. And for what? Because the idea that we've eliminated the risk of banks collapsing again is fanciful. It's absolutely fanciful. We have done nothing. I tell you what we should have done when the financial sector collapsed. We should have brought the financial sector, which is one of the most important sectors within our economy, under democratic control. That is what we should have done. Because if we are going to take the risk, we should be reaping the rewards. Look, I just want to touch on this because I know I haven't got a lot of time and you've got a lot of speakers. I want to touch on public transport, an area that is very, very close to my heart as the leader of a public transport union. The cuts that the coalition are implementing are going to have a devastating effect on public transport. Many towns and cities are either going to be left with no bus services, or with a reduced bus service, or a combination of a reduced bus service, no bus services to some destinations, and sky high fares for whatever little is left. In the railway, where the majority of my members work, we've now had a decade of above inflation fare increases. Passengers are absolutely fed up, and I don't blame them, for having to pay through the nose for using our railways. The reality is that we as a union have started to link up with those passengers to try and engineer a change. You know, we're having a conference just across the road from you today, where I'm dashing off after here. And we are launching the opening salvo in what's going to be our general election campaign. That is one that brings together green campaigners like yourselves, that brings together transport users, that brings together disability groups, because if you take staff out of stations, there's no one left behind to lend a hand. That brings together those people who are excluded from our economy because they cannot afford to get onto a public transport network. And which brings together all those people who are currently in work, who are paying through the nose, because the only way they can get to work is by using a train. And the aim, our aim, is to stop this madness. Because let's face the reality of this. Since the railways were privatized, the only people who've benefited have been shareholders. It's not been the passengers. We have now the highest fares, not just in Europe, but probably the world. It has not been taxpayers, because the subsidy going into the railway today is 4 times higher than it was under British Rail. And it has not been rail workers, because thousands upon thousands of my members and members of the R&T and the other unions in the railway have been sacked over the last decade and a half. So the reality is that the railway is now there to provide a profit to multinational companies at our expense. And you know, and I think I'll finish on this. We have now been told that the government wants to privatize the only publicly run railway in the country, the East Coast Main Line. The only reason it's in the public sector is because the private sector could not run it, not once, but twice. It has returned more money to the Treasury, because of course they don't have to pay dividends to shareholders. It has returned more money to the Treasury in the last 3 years, when it's been in the public sector, that Virgin Trains has done in 15 years, when it's been run for profit. This is a scandal. And the government is only doing this because they are ideologically motivated. It doesn't work, it makes no sense, and I hope you're going to join me in stopping it happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Andreas Itterstad from the Norwegian campaign for 100,000 climate jobs. Andreas.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. I'm also very honored to be here. I'm also on the board of what's called Concerned Scientists.